At $1,247, your balance is a constant hum of survival arithmetic where every grocery run is a calculation and money is the air you breathe just to stay afloat. The transition from zero to wealth is not a cinematic breakthrough, but a clinical shift where you stop treating money as emotional safety and start managing it as raw, compounding information. To reach the level where money becomes a tool of power, you must first survive the isolating disbelief of your first five-figure balance. Imagine you are staring at a glowing screen in the dark of your room at 11:43 p.m., lying on a mattress you hauled home from a stranger's driveway through Facebook Marketplace. You see $1,247 staring back at you. That is not a rainy day fund or a humble start to an investment portfolio. That is the entirety of your existence. You refresh the screen 60 seconds later because your brain hasn't processed the reality of that number. But it stays there. You are 23 years old and you are walking around with a $31,000 anchor of student loans and a $4,200 credit card bill that follows you like a shadow. By the time Friday's direct deposit actually hits, the money is already gone, swallowed by obligations you made weeks ago. Have you ever felt like you were just a ghost in your own financial life? You keep whispering to yourself that you aren't behind the curve, but the grocery store aisle tells a different story. You stand there debating whether the premium olive oil is a luxury you can afford, only to eventually reach for the generic store brand because every cent is a heavy weight. You find yourself tethered to a streaming service password shared with someone you no longer even enjoy talking to, simply because hitting cancel feels like you are surrendering a tiny piece of territory you can't afford to lose. Living at zero isn't some grand tragedy you see in a movie. It is more like a relentless static noise, a low, constant hum of arithmetic that vibrates beneath every single choice you make. You don't talk about it with friends because at this level, money is a secret language. You find yourself opening your bank app far more often than your messaging apps. You've memorized your 16-digit account number as if it were a prayer. Sometimes you trick yourself by sliding $200 into a savings bucket, only to yank it back 72 hours later when reality bites. At this stage, money isn't a hammer or a saw you use to build something. It is the very oxygen in the room. If it's there, you can breathe, but if it thins out even slightly, you are immediately gasping for air. The danger is that when you are at zero, your brain stops being logical and starts being entirely reactive. You finally get that first raise. It's $6,000 more a year. That sounds like a fortune until you realize it only translates to an extra $387 in your monthly take-home pay. You feel like a king for exactly 4 hours, right until your car decides it needs $900 in new brake pads and rotors. You realize then that life has a way of filling every vacuum you create. Expenses are like a liquid that expands to fill whatever container you provide. But then, you manage to kill that smallest $1,200 credit card. You take a screenshot of that beautiful zero balance, but you don't send it to anyone. Who would understand the profound weight of a single digital image? It represents the first time a number changed because you forced it to, not because of some outside accident. Fast forward to age 26. You look at your screen and see $10,000. You've never seen 5 figures in one place that belong to you. You check it every morning for a week, not because you're scared it's gone, but because you simply cannot believe it is real. That number carries a psychological mass that far exceeds its actual purchasing power. You feel like you've been initiated into a secret society of stable people. You start moving beyond the motivational fluff and start reading the technical manuals of how capital actually flows. You learn about index funds. You open a brokerage account and you just stare at the empty interface for 3 whole weeks, paralyzed by the gravity of the act. Eventually, you pull the trigger on a $1,500 investment, and naturally, the market drops the very next day. Do you panic and run, or do you stay? This is the crossroads where you decide if your life is governed by a series of frightened flinches or by cold, hard data. You stop seeing money as a security blanket and start seeing it as raw information. Now, you're earning $68,000. Your savings have climbed to $40,000. You have a Roth IRA that is actually growing. You are finally doing the things the world told you to do, maxing the 401k, padding the emergency fund, and keeping a tight leash on your lifestyle. Direct deposit hits on Friday and the money is already gone, swallowed by the ghost of last month's decisions. You are playing the game perfectly, or so you think, until one midnight you decide to get brutally honest with a spreadsheet. You project 40 years of this, 40 years of impeccable discipline and steady paychecks, and your heart drops. The final number isn't a disaster, but it's a mediocre compromise. It's enough to exist, but not enough to live. This is the competence plateau, a dead zone where you have mastered the art of not drowning but haven't the slightest clue how to build a ship. You are an expert survivor, but a total amateur builder. It hits you like a physical weight. A salary is just a glass ceiling painted to look like a marble floor. Once you recognize that your paycheck is a cage with a steady supply of grain, the illusion shatters. You can't unsee it. So you start a side project. You don't call it a startup or a brand. It's just a thing you do when everyone else is sleeping. It starts as a trickle, $400 a month. Then $900. By the time it hits $1,700, you realize you have a second life. You don't tell your boss. You don't even tell your friends. For 14 grueling months, every single dollar goes back into the furnace of that project. You eat the same cheap lunches and drive the same dented car. You refuse to let your lifestyle grow an inch. Suddenly, you look up and your net worth has surged past $80,000, then $110,000. You are feeling the widening canyon between where you are and where a simple salary would have left you. That canyon is leverage. Your money has started to breed. Your investments just returned $3,800 in a year while you did absolutely nothing. You've had months where your thing on the side actually beat your paycheck. You finally understand what an asset is, not as a definition in a book, but as a physical employee that works 24 hours a day without a break. Your perception of time starts to warp. Every hour isn't just 60 minutes anymore, it's fuel for the machine. If an hour doesn't compound, it feels like a leak in the tank. By age 32, you hit $150,000 in net worth. You're looking at a rental property with $44,000 in equity, a brokerage account at $61,000, and a business generating a crisp $6,200 every single month. Yet, you still drive that same car. You stay silent about your wealth because talking about money at this level makes people act weird. They either get bitter or they start looking for a handout, and neither helps you. You find yourself saying no to things that used to be a given. A destination wedding? No. A group trip where you'd end up paying for everyone's drinks? No. A revolutionary business idea from a friend who doesn't know a balance sheet from a grocery list? No, no, no. You feel the ice forming in your relationships, but you don't flinch. You've stopped spending money to buy belonging and started hoarding capital to buy freedom. At $300,000, your money develops a mind of its own. It has a personality. It has specific places it wants to go and places it refuses to stay. You watched one investment haul in $22,000 in just 8 months, and another vanish into a $9,400 loss. You didn't panic at the red ink. It's not that you don't value $9,400, but you realize it's just the tax you pay to stay in the game. You don't quit, you just move your pieces. The people at the bottom think the goal is to be safe. The people at the top know the goal is to choose which dangers are worth the price. Make sure to hit the bell and subscribe so you don't miss the next phase of this transformation. What's the biggest risk you've ever sat with? Tell me in the comments. Remember the third rule, below $500,000, you are still the one buying assets. Once you cross that $500,000 mark, the assets start buying each other. You have reached the edge of the orbit. It is a sensation akin to the static electricity you feel in the air right before a thunderstorm breaks. Your net worth has climbed from $670,000 to $810,000. By the time you are 36, the ledger reads $920,000. To get here, you have had to tear the engine apart and rebuild it, restructuring your business twice, bringing on a strategic partner, and executing a calculated exit from one investment only to roll every cent of those proceeds into a much larger play. You stop sleeping through the night, but it is not the frantic insomnia of a man drowning in debt. It is a high-voltage intensity. You are sending out directives at 5:30 a.m. to contacts halfway across the globe. You are mentally stress-testing scenarios while the shower water runs cold. When a headhunter dangles a job offer with a $210,000 annual salary, you turn it down without blinking. Your parents look at you as if you have lost your mind. You don't try to explain the math of the game to them. You just tell them the fit wasn't right, which is a convenient half-truth for people who still see a paycheck as the ultimate finish line. Then, on a completely unremarkable Tuesday, the barrier breaks. You refresh your brokerage screen and there it is, $1,040,000. You thought this moment would be cinematic, like a grand opening or a victory lap. Instead, it is just a quiet realization followed by an immediate sense of insufficiency. You do the mental arithmetic. A 4% return on $1 million is only $40,000 a year. That is not a beach in the south of France. That is just a very expensive starting block. This is the moment the identity crisis settles in. You realize that you were never actually chasing a specific feeling of happiness. You were chasing a proof of concept. The million is just the receipt proving your logic was sound. Consequently, you stop showing up to the loud rooms. You are done with the startup mixes and the finance seminars where everyone is wearing a name badge and shouting about their hustle, while hiding the true cost of their stress. You don't judge them, you just don't belong there anymore. The real moves are being discussed in much smaller rooms with people who have nothing to prove and no badges to wear. By the time you hit $2.3 million, the hum of financial anxiety that played in the background of your life for a decade finally cuts to silence. Money is no longer a source of fear. It has been downgraded to a mere resource, no different than your time or your focus. You aren't checking your bank balance to see if you can afford a dinner. You are obsessing over allocation. Where is the capital sitting? What is the risk-adjusted return profile? What blind spots are you missing? You hire a wealth manager, realize within months that you understand your own unique leverage better than he does, and fire him. You replace him with a specialist who costs 3 times as much, says half as much, and manages families whose names are on the buildings you walk past. Your business is now doing $4.1 million in revenue. You have 2 rental properties with $380,000 in equity and a portfolio sitting at $1.6 million. You aren't dinner party rich, the kind of person who brags about a new car. You are actually wealthy, which means you own your calendar. You take a 3-week vacation and for 5 consecutive days, you do not open your email once. Anyone can buy a plane ticket, but almost no one can buy those 5 days of total disconnection. Remember the 4th rule. Wealth isn't the pile of stuff you collect, it's the list of things you no longer have to do. At $5 million, the very texture of the game changes. You are no longer building a tower, you are moving the landscape. You aren't working for capital anymore, you are positioning it like pieces on a board. The difference between those 2 states is a total shift in gravity. You are currently in a deal that will return $800,000 in just 18 months. You are now managing a portfolio where one venture promises an $800,000 windfall within 18 months, while another alongside it carries the very real possibility of returning exactly 0. You aren't gambling, you're engineering a hedge. You realize the true profit isn't in the individual assets, but in the invisible thread of correlation connecting them, using one to insulate the other. Could you have even parsed that sentence 4 years ago? Probably not. Now, you've begun observing the titans at the $20 million and $50 million marks with the same clinical obsession you once had for your first 10,000. You aren't looking at their watches or their garages. You are dissecting their cognitive architecture. Their internal clock has slowed down. They have traded the frantic need to win every individual hand for the long-term patience required to simply be the last person standing at the table. Subscribe now if you want to see how that mindset shift actually happens. Have you noticed how your social circle has tightened? You stop discussing finances with anyone who hasn't reached this level. It isn't out of elitism. It's a matter of linguistic precision. When you speak to those who don't have it, they project their own fears and assign a heavy, emotional weight to numbers that, to you, are just data. In the wrong room, mentioning that $500,000 is merely a standard position size rather than a life-altering jackpot makes you a monster, so you simply stay silent. By the time your net worth hits $14 million, you are walking through doors that once felt like fiction. You aren't at parties. You are in the rooms where the world is shaped. You are sitting with a family office that manages $600 million because they want to co-invest on your terms. You're on a call with a private equity firm that needs you as an operating partner for a major platform acquisition. You aren't there as a guest. You're there because your capital is a battery and your pattern recognition is a map they need. This brings us to the 5th rule. At $10 million, your reputation itself becomes a high-yield financial instrument. It generates returns on autopilot, regardless of your daily input. Then comes the moment that would have felt like a moral crisis 5 years ago. A company in your portfolio undergoes a massive restructuring, letting go of 140 workers. You know the CFO personally. You've shared dinners and stories. But you don't call him to intervene. You don't ask for a reprieve. You look at the cap table, you analyze the improved margin profile, and you hold your position. You don't feel a surge of joy or a pang of guilt. You just feel the sheer distance, the widening canyon between an executive decision and its human ripple effect. You don't fight that silence. It's part of the landscape now. By age 54, you have crossed the $30 million threshold. You've moved past the era of individual effort and into the era of legacy structures. You have a trust protecting the core assets and a foundation that costs $800,000 annually just to keep the lights on and the doors of high-level access open. You recognize that you are invited to certain tables because of the check you can write and the power you represent, and you've stopped pretending it's about anything else. Pretending is a tax on your energy, and energy is the only asset in your life that doesn't compound over time. The game no longer asks for your presence, it asks for your perspective. You could disappear for 6 months and the machine would continue its steady, rhythmic expansion. That was the whole point of building it. Your wealth now grows simply because you are alive, fueled by frameworks you spent a decade perfecting and ownership stakes in 11 different companies. Hit the bell and you have transitioned into a world where you aren't begging for an audience with politicians. You have a direct connection to the people who actually draft the policy. You aren't some lobbyist pushing an agenda. You're an advisor. The difference between those two roles might be subtle to some, but to you, that distinction is your entire world. Maybe it should weigh on you more than it does, but you're operating at a different frequency now. By the time you hit $80 million, the isolation you feel isn't exactly loneliness, it's more like a structural disconnect. Your life has moved so far beyond the standard orbit that your reality is essentially untranslatable to anyone you used to know. Your inner circle hasn't been handpicked. It has been formed through a natural selection of conversation. You only spend time with people at your same altitude because they are the only ones who can actually speak the language of fund structures, secondaries, and dynasty trusts. You haven't changed as a human, but the context of your existence has become a foreign tongue to the rest of the world. At this level, you give away more money than you ever thought possible. It's not for the tax breaks or the foundation prestige, though you're clinical enough to know those are built-in features. You give because once you cross that $50 million mark, the sixth rule kicks in. Money stops being a scoreboard for your ego and starts being a GPS for your reach. Giving is one of the few things left that feels like a conscious choice rather than a mechanical outcome of the machine. You are 61 years old now, sitting on a net worth of $94 million. That specific number is a secret shared by only 3 people on the planet. You haven't worked a standard 9 to 5 in 9 years, yet you've never truly stopped working. You've just traded the calendar for the compass. You think in massive demographic and credit cycles now, positioning your capital 3 days ahead of the storm like a sailor reading the pressure drop in the air. Even when you're wrong, even when a position lags by 200 basis points, you just rebalance. It doesn't touch your lifestyle. It's just data. Fast forward to age 26. You look at your screen and see $10,000. You've never seen 5 figures in one place that belong to you. You check it every morning for a week, not because you're scared it's gone, but because you simply cannot believe it is real. That number carries a psychological mass that far exceeds its actual purchasing power. You feel like you've been initiated into a secret society of stable people. You start moving beyond the motivational fluff and start reading the technical manuals of how capital actually flows. You learn about index funds. You open a brokerage account and you just stare at the empty interface for 3 whole weeks, paralyzed by the gravity of the act. Eventually, you pull the trigger on a $1,500 investment, and naturally, the market drops the very next day. Do you panic and run, or do you stay? This is the crossroads where you decide if your life is governed by a series of frightened flinches or by cold, hard data. You stop seeing money as a security blanket and start seeing it as raw information. Now, you're earning $68,000. Your savings have climbed to $40,000. You have a Roth IRA that is actually growing. You are finally doing the things the world told you to do, maxing the 401k, padding the emergency fund, and keeping a tight leash on your lifestyle. Imagine a room with 5 people. In that one small space, there is enough combined liquidity to rewrite the fate of a mid-sized national economy. You don't need a spectacle. You speak for exactly 4 minutes, ask 2 sharp questions, and watch as the entire strategy of the room recalibrates to your coordinates. You're gone before the catering even arrives. That is power at its most compressed. Meanwhile, somewhere in the same city, a 24-year-old is staring at a screen with a balance of $1,247. He's standing in a grocery store line, doing the silent math of survival. He puts back the premium coffee and settles for the store brand, convinced that his struggle is a story about money. He thinks that if he can just stack enough cash, his problems will vanish. He has no idea that the real cost of this journey isn't measured in dollars, but in distance, the sheer, cold gap that opens up between the person who starts and the person who actually survives to the end. The machine doesn't care if you're ready or if the trade is fair. It just waits for whoever shows up every single day without flinching. If you can stay patient and keep your eyes on the cycles, you compound. The money compounds, and so does the person you become. But remember, the balance is $1,247. It always starts right there. It always will. Make sure you hit the bell and subscribe so you don't lose your way when the math starts to get heavy.